Hello, welcome to this lesson on planning a new government. Last week you read about the Articles of Confederation. The beginning of the war, the Second Continental Congress knew they needed a plan of government. They needed something in place on how they would run these 13 colonies as a country. So they created the Articles of Confederation. The Articles of Confederation was not a very good plan of government. Each state could do its own thing, which is not very good if you're trying to run an entire country. Each state printed its own money. So if you go from one state to the other, you have to exchange money to whatever that state uses. So that creates some problems because some states had money that was more valuable than others. Because remember back then, you had to have gold to back up what how much money or what the value of your money was. So some states had more gold than others, and you can see here states couldn't tax, or the states could tax. Sorry, but Congress could not tax the states. So Congress could not get any money from the states. They had to rely on people donating money to them. They couldn't collect taxes. Another problem that it had is each state would have its own trade laws. So how they could trade goods was different from state to state, which made it hard for merchants to try to figure out, okay, keeping what can I do in this state versus what can't I do in this state. So it made things very difficult. And the other thing is it gave states too much power. So it really was not a good plan for what we call a federal government, a government to run the entire country. So it didn't work out very well. And eventually, a few years later, they're going to realize after the Revolutionary War, they're going to need to come up with a better plan for the Articles of Confederation. Again, all the things just mentioned, they couldn't tax the states. They had to beg for money from the states, especially to help pay for the Revolutionary War. Each state had different currency, which we call money, and each state had its own trade laws. So to run the country, the Articles of Confederation were not a good plan. One good thing that did come out of it was something you read about called the Northwest Territory. This was land north of the Ohio River and east of the Mississippi River. If you look in the map on page 197, you can see where the Northwest Territory was. Out of the Articles of Confederation, a law did come that talked about how territories and states are formed. A territory is a piece of land controlled by a different country. So as the United States eventually would start to get bigger, it's going to have more territory and more land. So they came up with a rule, or a law, I should say, on how territories could be formed. So this is what we call the Northwest Ordinance. It said in order for an area to officially become a territory of the United States, it has to have a population of at least 5,000 free white males that own land. Once they get to that number of people, they can ask Congress for permission to become a member of the United States as a territory. We're going to learn more about this next year in sixth grade. So after you become a territory, you can then become a state. And in order to do that, you need to have a population of at least 60,000 people. And then there's steps you have to go through to officially become a state. We'll learn about all the territory and state stuff next year when we learn about how Minnesota eventually became a territory and then a state. So we'll talk more about that next year. And under the Articles of Confederation, one thing that showed that it was weak was what you read about was the rebellion in Massachusetts. Lawmakers in Massachusetts were trying to raise money to pay the debt they owed, so they were trying to increase taxes. And they said people had to pay them in gold and silver because paper money, remember, still did not have a lot of money. Well, farmers didn't like that because they didn't have the money. They were in debt too. So farmers decided to fight back in something called Shays' Rebellion. Shay was one of the leaders of this rebellion to fight back against Massachusetts. And they attacked an arsenal, a place where weapons are stored. And many farmers were killed during this time period. And it showed that this rebellion showed that you need to have a strong government for the entire country. And the Articles of Confederation were not a strong plan. So they said, you know what? We need to get together. We need to come up with something better because this plan is not working. Shays' Rebellion just showed this plan isn't working. We need to have something better. So they decided we are going to have a meeting in Philadelphia. And this meeting is going to be called the Constitutional Convention. There were, just like the First Continental Congress, the Second Continental Congress, there were delegates from every 13 states there. They're not colonies anymore. The war is over. Now they're states. And they have to come up with a plan. And a gentleman by the James Madison really kind of took charge of this meeting. So they decided they had to come up with a legislature. The legislature is one of the vocab words that was in the text on page 200. It's the job of the legislature to make laws. They create legislation or laws. So they had to figure out how are laws going to be made in this country. And so that's going to take a lot of time for them, a lot of arguing to decide what will this legislature look like? How will we make laws for this country? They are going to come up with something called Congress. It'll be the job of Congress to make laws. In the next video, I will talk more about Congress and what Congress looks like and how Congress makes laws. So after this, go on in the next video where I talk about Congress.